The Holy Gospel according to St. Luke, the 14th chapter. Glory to you, O Lord. Now large crowds were traveling with Jesus, and he turned and said to them, "Whoever comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even life itself, cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not carry the cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. For which of you, intending to build a tower, does not first sit down and estimate the cost, to see whether he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it will begin to ridicule him, saying, 'This fellow began to build and was not able to finish.' Or what king, going out to wage war against another king, will not sit down first and consider whether he is able with 10,000 to oppose the one who comes against him with 20,000? If he cannot, then while the other is still far away, he sends a delegation and asks for the terms of peace. So therefore, none of you can become my disciple if you do not give up all your possessions." The Gospel of the Lord. So I am not sure whether it's still there, but it probably is hidden someplace. Back a number of years ago, we had a poster in the church nursery, and it was entitled Toddler Rules. You may have seen the toddler rules before because sometimes they're put on T-shirts and they're put in the internet and stuff like that. But in fact, if you've ever had or taken care of a toddler, you know them intuitively. These are some of the toddler rules that were printed on the poster. Number 1, if I like it, it's mine. If it's in my hand, it's mine. If I can take it from you, it's mine. If I had it a little while ago, it's mine. If it's mine, it must never, ever appear to be yours in any way. If I'm building something, all the pieces are mine. If it looks just like mine, it's mine. If I saw it first, it's mine. If you're playing with something and you put it down, it automatically becomes mine. If it's broken, it's yours. So all toddlers, they go through this stage and we laugh because we know it's true. But I've always wondered just how far we really get from the toddler rules in our lives as adults. Although we get older and we become more sophisticated in what we decide is mine, to be honest, most of us probably still have a tenacious grasp on the concept of mine. And as adults, that is especially true with more abstract things, like my right or my privilege. And it's often hard to give up things that we think are rightfully ours, especially if we've held them tightly for a very long time. Yet Jesus comes along in today's gospel reading, and as his final closing remark says, "None of you can become my disciple if you do not give up all your possessions." Now, of course, because we know we should move beyond the toddler rules, most of us are willing to give up some possessions and maybe even some things that we think we have a right to, especially if we can feel good about helping somebody else in need, or if someone rightfully acknowledges that what we have given them was really mine. But that's not actually the hard part of what Jesus is saying in today's gospel reading. Jesus isn't calling us to give up stuff as much as he's calling us to let go of that personal pronoun, mine. When Jesus says, "None of you can become my disciple if you do not give up all your possessions," he isn't so much telling us that we ought to live without our stuff, as much as he's telling us that we ought to live without that sense of mine. That is, he's calling us to give up the your in your possessions. And that's because so often the mine is really what keeps me from following Jesus and being his disciple. Because that sense of mine tells me that I am entitled to all of the things I have. They're mine. And so I see them as something that I have an innate right to, instead of seeing them as gifts in my life. And at that moment, I really stop even considering that what I have is at least partly the result of other people giving me opportunities to get those things, and God giving me the abilities to do certain things. I mean, I start to think that it's all about me and not about others or about God. and the mind stops me from following Jesus. That sense of mine, it also tells me that I have an absolute right to use how I use whatever thing because it's mine. I can use it however I want. Nobody else gets to tell me what to do with it, well, maybe not even God. And of course, it is freeing not to have to play by other people's rules in my own house. But sometimes, when I get that sense of mine going, I stop even considering how I should use a thing or an opportunity, even if I theoretically can do anything I want with it. Mine tells me to use it for myself, rather than to ask, how could I use that gift for somebody else? And sometimes, the sense of mine tells me that I have value because of what I have, or what I'm able to control, or just the value of my life is the sum of what I have, or what I can control. My sense of self-worth is too often centered on myself and how I can use my stuff and my opportunities to insulate myself from the chaos and confusion that's going on around me. And when I reach those moments, I start to rely on myself and my own ability to use my stuff and my resources to insulate myself, rather than to truly trust God's love and guidance to help me get through the chaos and the confusion. I start to have a bunker mentality that I can just hide myself away and not invest myself in the world that God is sending me into. And that gets in the way of being a disciple. And so giving up mine is often the most important thing we need to give up in order to follow Jesus. We don't ever manage that completely in this life, but Jesus calls us to struggle to do just that. That's because it's only through giving up mine and my program that I can truly get into what's God's and God's program. And indeed, being disciples of Jesus is fundamentally about being involved and committed to God's program for us and for the whole world. And it requires time and energy and resources. And the only thing that will make it possible to do what Jesus calls us to do is if we see our time and our energy and our money not simply as mine, but as God's gifts in our lives so that we can be involved not simply in our own program, but in God's. And at least for me, part of learning to give up the mine in my possessions is about practicing spending my time and my energy and my money in such a way that I focus on giving thanks to God for what I have. That is, using the opportunity of giving to appreciate what God has given me instead of counting how much I have left. It's hard sometimes to do that because if I'm going to give something, whether it's money or time or even just doing simple things like peanut butter and jelly things, you get into a sense of going, okay, now how much do I have first? And then it's all about me. Instead of looking at things and going, wow, look what I can do. Look what I've been able to give. That looks at the gifts God's given us instead of simply asking what's left for me or what's mine. Sometimes struggling against mine is about focusing on God's giving to me. Rather, that is, seeing my time and efforts as a way of experiencing God working through me to do something in the life of the world around me. So we always have chosen this Sunday to do the work around the church and thing is God's Work, Our Hands Sunday. The idea of God's work, our hands, is about actually seeing that what we're doing in investing ourselves in the life of the community is about also experiencing God working through us. It's about looking at ourselves as vehicles of God in the life of the world, not just today, but in general. Because when we start to look and see ourselves as vehicles of God doing things, then it becomes about God and not about us. And that's a way of the mind getting out of the way so that Jesus can work through us. And sometimes focusing on getting past the mind is about focusing on how my possessions are actually my gifts. That is, understanding myself to be a gifted person instead of an entitled person or even simply a lucky person. Because part of getting beyond mine is looking at things and saying, wow, I'm able to do this because people help me. God worked through those people to help me to do something. God gave me abilities to do things that other people can't do. And at that moment, I start to focus on God's gifts instead of simply what I've been able to accumulate because of the gifts. And those are honestly all hard things to stay focused on, especially in a society that tells us that we always need more, and the marketers and the politicians who tell us that we are entitled to so much more than we already have. But Jesus calls us to give up our claims on mine so that we can fully appreciate God's claim on us. Jesus calls us to give up our claims on mine so that we can appreciate God's gifts to us each day. And Jesus calls us to give up our claims on mine so that we can grow as disciples of Jesus who can be God's hands and presence in the life of the world around us. But even more than that, in the end, whether I give up my claim on mine or not, nothing that I call mine will actually remain mine forever. It will all pass away. But there is one mine that never goes away and does last forever. And that mine is God's mine. And it happens when God says to each one of us, you are mine. That never goes away.